do it the right way. And then Peter can make sure that things get taken care of in the right way. So the other things coming up, just a couple of things. We did the Pints for Polio, we're doing polio. We've had a very busy start to the month, and next month I think is considered our foundation month. So lots of important things for Rotary. And I'm going to bring Allison back up. Allison's going to introduce our guest speaker. When I was thinking of somebody to introduce, I thought, who better? So it's a chance to say anything you would like, and careful payback can be tough.
That's right. Thanks, President Brett. So this fellow needs no introduction, but I will give it my best shot. Tom Storey is a Rotarian of the Rotary Club of Chatham, and he joined in 1983. Is that right, Dad?
I don't remember.
Okay, well, I'm just going to say 1983, sponsored by Bob Tyndall, who he worked with in my grandpa's architecture office. And he's been an active Rotarian ever since. He has a very extremely dry sense of humor, to the point where often people don't know that he is joking when he's talking to them, which you likely, everyone here has probably experienced that. He is an avid sailor, so if you would like to discuss sailing, you can discuss, get him talking, talk about the new boat he and a good friend just purchased. And born and raised in Chatham, went to the University of Toronto, where he got a degree in, and a master's degree in urban planning. Child rearing. Right. PhD, Dad, PhD. And so he's going to talk to us today about a little bit of history of Rotary. And since Barry is not here, but on the computer, Barry, you're going to have to put your comments in the chat. Oh, there's Barry. Put all your comments and compliments in the chat, Barry. I'm sure you've got plenty of them. So welcome, Tom Storey, for a little history of Rotary in our centennial year. Remember, you have until 1 at the absolute latest.
I got the stopwatch.
Okay.
So. I can't see my notes.
Well, you can hold the note. Everyone knows what you want.
Oh, hi, Barry. Hi, Pierre, Tracy, Paul. Paul, I assume you're there. Yeah, and Keith, and fellow Rotarians. Last time I spoke as a speaker, it really was a classification talk a few years ago, a reclassification talk, and I went on for hours, and most people were asleep at the end. So given that precedent, I will say, try and leave some time for some questions at the end for those of you who are still conscious. I'm not going to speak about the 3 things that are probably the biggest events in Rotary since I belong, or since I joined. One is the women coming into Rotary. Barry and I spoke a little bit about this I spoke a little bit, Barry spoke a lot. A couple of months ago. And Karen's going to be speaking about that next week, I think, Karen. Yeah. And also polio. Obviously, that's something that's been ongoing in our club since 1988. So we can't get much bigger than that. But I think Barry will be speaking about that again in a few weeks. And the other thing is the youth mental health efforts we've had, where Tom McCarthy has done most of the heavy lifting, but I've been associated with that as well. It's been a major endeavor for me in my time in Rotary, so in the last 16 or 17 years. But that's a subject that needs to be refreshed often and requires its own program. So I don't want to say too much about that either. Touch this, something bad happens. Okay. So my first Rotary meeting occurred December 22nd, 1948. I was 9 months old. My dad, a newly minted Rotarian, took me to the Christmas party that year in the old Marina Room at the William Pitt Hotel. I have very fond memories of it, of course. And I attended a number of meetings after that, Christmas parties when I was younger, and then special meetings. So I was well acquainted with Rotary. I had a lot of friends in the club when I joined. My father had been a Rotarian, my grandfather, I had 2 uncles in the club at the time. So I was pretty well wired to become a Rotarian. And it wasn't a big transition for me to join. Now, we've had Christmas. What I like to do is do a little bit of traditional stuff that we no longer have present in the club. Talk about some of the items that have occurred over the years that I'd like to bring up. And then I have some comments about my year as president to finish off. So Christmas parties. When I was young, of course, many of the Rotarians were quite young, actually, by today's standards, and had young families. And Christmas parties were really something for quite a while. Certainly the year I was president, it was large. I can remember taking my eldest daughter to her first one, and she was about 4, and predictably, she was terrified with Santa Claus. Probably in retrospect, a good emotion to have at that time. But there were a number of traditions that we don't follow anymore that are certainly prevalent and common for many years. First of all, we all wore jacket and ties to every meeting. That went on. I'm sure we just slowly got out of that. I'm not sure what the demographics or what was causing that trend, but obviously we don't do it anymore. The only thing we used to do was to apologize to the speaker if you had to leave early. And yes, that's when she left. She came over and apologized to me before she left. So I wouldn't say it's gone, but it's not common anymore. Then we'd all get up after the speaker was done and go and queue up and thank the speaker, he or she or he, for their talk and converse a little bit. Of course, we don't do that anymore. I try and do it. That's a tradition I've sort of built into me, and I just do it sort of automatically. Another tradition that we still recognize, but it's changed a lot, is Remembrance Day. When I first joined, I swear about half the club were veterans. And I can remember the very first meeting, or the very first Remembrance Day meeting I attended. And all the veterans were asked to stand. They were all asked in advance to wear their medals. And it seemed like the whole room stood up to me. So, excuse me, our last veteran died this year, Ross Everly. Yes, okay, I'm giving signals here from Allison. And so our meetings aren't quite the same. Most of those early meetings, early for me, the veterans, we'd had firsthand accounts as to what their recollections of being in the war meant to them. So I miss that. We used to have 3 songs, not 2. And the reason for that, I didn't realize this at first until I was actually president. was back when we were at Christ Church, the meals were all catered, of course, and but they were delivered to us. And the caterer's responsibility included clearing all the tables when we were done eating, but prior to the speaker. So we needed 3 songs to sing to give the caterer time. Who's laughing at that? Someone, Paul? I got a response here. And when we switched to 2, I was alarmed that, hey, the caterer doesn't have time to move the dishes anymore. But of course, they're not doing it anyway, so I guess it doesn't matter. But that's why we had 3 songs, and singing songs was a big part of the club. I thought it was kind of weird when I joined, but I grew used to it. And now if we don't have it, I miss it for sure. An ongoing discussion as well was what I call the Smith-Solomon debate about how we should spend our money. Smith being Glenn Smith, a former president of the club, and the second year I was in, and also manager at CIBC. And Glenn was one who said we shouldn't have any money in the club. We should all be flowing through to the public, and we should have a good strategy how we're going to spend that money. Doug, on the other hand, said we should save our money and invest it so that we always have some revenue that we can spend on the various programs that we are vested in annually and have traditionally supported. So in the typical Canadian fashion, we've done both. We've invested a lot of money, as you know, but we also spent a lot of money. So I'm one of those guys who listens to the last person I've talked to. So I always say, Glenn, you're right. I think that's what we should do. And then when Doug would stand up and talk about it, I said, Doug, you're right. I think that's what we should do. So I don't really have an opinion on it. But it's an ongoing debate. And there are times when I tend to lean more towards Glenn's position, I have to say. Something else we used to do is what we called interclub meetings. And those would be meetings where we'd visit an American club and they'd come back and visit us in the same year. And when I was president, that was still something we were doing. Obviously, that's died out. Of course, during COVID, it's never going to happen anyways. But we also would have interclub meetings with other clubs in Kent County or Chatham, Kent on a pretty regular basis. All the clubs, in that case, all the clubs would get together for one event somewhere. I remember one in Wallsburg in particular, we had a huge turnout. So it'd be nice since we're getting sort of a rebirth after having our 2-year hiatus of not being able to get together with ourselves, let alone somebody else. But think about something like that. So lastly, I'd like to talk about when I became president. And I just thumbed through our little member directory, which I still have from that year. And we had 128 members. Women weren't in the club yet. That was going to happen the following presidential year of Jack Pearson. But we had 19 committees. We had, won't go through them all, but the bingo was the largest. We had 4 teams. Hank Broman, who was Mr. Bingo, if there was anyone in Chatham, was chaired the whole committee. We had 26 members on that. We had 13 members on our Easter Seal committee, which of course doesn't exist anymore. We had 12 on our Senior Citizens committee, but most of those senior citizens were people who were just really old, but never attended. But we had to stick them on a committee somewhere. So there were like maybe 1 or 2 active members on that committee. And general like this, we had 12 members of our program committee, 1 for each month. And fellowship and greeting. We had 2 each month. Our youth exchange committee, Rob Watson headed that up for me. And there was 12 members on that. Back in the day, that particular year, we had 9 outbound students from our club. 9 out of 16 from the whole district came from this club. We had 3 inbound. And it was the first year that inbound students were hosted by club members. And so the Littles, who weren't Rotarians, had agreed to host a girl from France. And it figures, the first family we've got to host from outside the club, the girl who arrived was bulimic. And we had to send her home after a couple of months. And I'll always be thankful to Rob for organizing that, taking on a tough job, and seeing that she was safely returned to her home in France. What was also odd about that was that her mother was a psychiatrist, and how she ever got through the initial screening for an exchange program is, people like that aren't supposed to be in an exchange program. So that was a lesson learned. Also, excuse me. That was the year I got the environment committee started up. Environmental, anyways, the environment committee. And Barry Fraser agreed to head it up. And I have to say this, but I don't want to. Thank you, Barry, for heading up the environment committee. You did a great job, and it went on for years. It was very successful. It's one of the things coming out of my presidency that I was quite proud of. And that first year, we organized a tree planting program that was basically windrows around a number of school sites. And I can thank Andy for all he did, which was plenty, to arrange for funding, which made the whole program possible. And we planted our first tree at Mountain Avenue School during the district conference, which was in Chatham that year, and Brian Williams, the district governor, planted that tree in the rain. So, and that took off. Every time I drive by Winston Churchill School, I think of Frank Archibald, who lived nearby and looked after. We had members looking after each school site and make sure the trees would survive and flourish. And Frank looked after Winston Churchill, and he reported regularly to me, even long after I was not president anymore, let me know that as things are going well. If you're driving by Winston Churchill School, think of Frank, because those trees were his babies, to say the least. I want to close. I want to talk about a meeting. Well, one other thing, sorry, from my year as president was we had a debate. CCI had an Interact club at the time. And so I forget who challenged who, but of course the issue of allowing women in Rotary was a hot topic at that time. So there was a debate organized between the Interact Club and our club. It was held in the CCI library. And what was interesting was that some of the members of our club who were going to be on the debating team were picked because they had expressed doubts about having women join. I'm not going to say who they are now. They're not with us anymore. Not because of that, but because they were older, put it that way. And but they had to take a position that women should be at Rotary. What do you call that, Brad, when you have to be taking in one position or the other? There's a special debating term.
Oh, losing.
Pardon? Yeah. Brad was on the UT debating team, so I thought he'd know the answer to that question. Anyways, so we had them take that position, have to debate the pros of that in Rotary, and the CCI debating team had to take the position that wasn't a good idea to have women. And not surprisingly, the CCI team won hands down. I say not surprisingly because their debating skills were greatly superior to those, as it turned out, of our own debating team. I mentioned that though, because I think there was a lot of fun when we had it, and maybe we could do something like that again. I don't know if we've got any other rap clubs around here anymore. We're even having a debate within our own club, have two sides and get a hot button subject, get people to be involved. So the one big event for my year as president was a special meeting we had January 17th, 1991. And that was the year, that was the Rotary year, that first of all, Lois and Dick Pierce, Dick of course was the past district governor and the president of our club, retired CAO from Public General Hospital. He and Lois, his wife, a physician out in the Southwest Regional Center, walked from White Rock, British Columbia to Halifax. And by coincidence, and they would, it's not like they decided one day we're going to do it, the next day they did it practice for years. How to get practice walking, I mean, in a way, but they would walk to Wallaceburg and back. You know, you'd often see them on Highway 40. And so, oh, there's Lois and Dick, you know, what's wrong with them? You know, and I'd see them when I was driving by. But I didn't realize at that time what they were trained. And I later thought, well, I don't think walking to Wallaceburg would be back, but help them a lot walking through British Columbia. But they did it. As it turns out, the day they started in April, they finished in November. It wasn't planned as such, but word got out that they were doing this amongst Rotary clubs along their route. And Dick started being a guest speaker, and his subject was the foundation. So I don't know how much good he did for the foundation, but I'm sure it was tremendous. So, and I would have club presidents from the different clubs he went to send me newspaper articles reporting on his talk, which was basically the same article repeated about, I don't know, 10 or 15 times. When he got to Halifax, we had hoped to have some members from our club. I don't know if anyone went or not, but our district governor went, some other members of the district, to walk the last kilometer with him, he and Lois. I called the president of Halifax, which there's a couple of Halifax clubs, I forget which one now. And he lined up a number of their members to walk as well. So it was quite a crowd walking down, I don't know, that street that runs parallel to the harbor there. I can't remember its name. And he took the water he picked up in a jar at White Rock and poured it into to Halifax Harbor. So that all occurred about the same time we were meeting that day at our own club. And so we toasted him. And that was a huge accomplishment that meant a lot to prestige of our club. The other thing was, we had our first Rotarian who that day, January 17th, was going to be celebrating his 50th year in Rotary, Proctor Dick. He was Mr. Everything in Rotary. He was also a past district governor and president of the club. And he had joined in on January 17th, 1941. And that was a Thursday. The club has always met on Wednesday at noon, but as far as I could tell at the time, that was the first time they had decided not to meet on the Wednesday. And that was because the Kent Regiment was shipping out on the Wednesday. And that was a big deal. Excuse me, that was a big deal in 1941. And I remember, excuse me, and I remember they had a photo. I was getting all this from the newspaper, the old Chatham Daily News papers at the library, and there was a picture of the officers from the regiment, and there was a Lieutenant R.S. Bradley there. And I thought, of course, Bob Bradley was a long-term member of our club. And I said, I knew Bob in the Army. And so I wasn't sure if that was him because the photo was hard to tell whether it was him or not. So I called him. I said, Bob, I'm just looking at this old photo of the Kent Regiment and the officers. And there's Lieutenant R.S. Bradley here. Was that you? And he said, oh, yeah, that was me, chatted for a while. And I said, you know, that was 50 years ago. And there was this really long pause. And he couldn't believe it because it was like it was yesterday for him. His memories of that occasion and the years that followed were permanently imprinted on his mind. So we were celebrating Proctor Dick, we're celebrating the Pierces. Brian Williams, the Dust District Governor that year, was there, and with his wife Ruth. And it turns out they were celebrating their 50th wedding anniversary. And it also turned out that was the day that President Bush unleashed Operation Desert Shield, the invasion of Kuwait to drive the Iraqis out. So, you know, Canada was going back to war, although our involvement in that conflict is not like it was in 1941. So, how do I finish with the reasons I joined Rotary? Like I mentioned earlier, I was all wired for, coming from 3 generations of Rotarians. And at the time, what impressed me was how well organized Rotary was, and spending and being accountable for dollars we raised, particularly international projects. Because that was a real interest of mine at the time. So I knew most of not most, but I knew a lot of the people and got to know them over time. And so I enjoyed the fellowship too. But here I am 38 years later, and I take a lot of the stuff we do for granted, international work. I just assume it's going to be well organized, money well spent. And it's not a big concern of mine. The only thing that matters now are you guys. The fellowship is what matters. So, the end. Oh, okay. I don't know, how long is it? 25 minutes, that's not bad. Anyone have any questions? If you're smart, you don't check on here.
Any questions for Tom?
Oh, Andy, go.
Wait a minute, go for it.
On the environment committee, you mentioned the funding for the environmental project. It's a very interesting side line, which I think a lot of people, some here, some have not heard it. At that time, I was doing really PR work for the Canadian Grain Commission, and I went to the Ontario Federation of Agriculture convention at the Skyline in Toronto, and they have a bunch of exhibits. And one of the exhibits was from the organization that we had applied to for funding. So I played stupid and asked, you know, what they did, and then I started to talk to the lady, and she knew the application had come in, and so I said, well, who was on the board? Who that was? She didn't know all the board members, but she would be able to. So that was fine, and not 2 minutes later, I stepped out into the hall, and everybody went by, and the lady I knew was Donna Stewart in Lambton County. I said, the strangest thing just happened here or there. She said, well, I'm on the board. This is a big story. for a federal organization. I'm on the board. So Donna and I had lunch, most expensive lunches I bought today. And she took our cause to the meeting. They had kind of planned that all of the funds were to go to the hospital, animal hospital in Eastern Ontario, for lost animals, but she said, I just put my foot down and said, if you want your half of the money for that, Kent County's going to get their half of the trees. And we got $57,000 that year in grant, and that paid for all the trees for around the schoolyard. That was a chance meeting, but it paid off.
Great place, right time.
Yeah. Keith and Paul, did you hear that? What Andy said about getting the money for the trees in 1981? Say yes. Okay, good. Okay.
I think it was 91.
Thank you very much, Tom. That's one of the things that I enjoy in Rotary is hearing what this club had done in the past. And I mean, we're celebrating 100 years, so that is really something. And you know, I'm like Tom, where the fellowship is key. I very much appreciate the work that the Toms did with regard to mental health, especially for youth. It's definitely something we need to have in place. So that concludes the meeting. Hang on one second here.